Hello boys and girls, it's Aunty Mimmi here. Today I've got a very magical story for you. Our book today is called The Merrymaid of Zennor, and it's about a beautiful mermaid. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? So sit back, get comfortable, and let's begin. Zennor lies between the Cornish Sea in West Penwith, the most mysterious part of all Cornwall. There are no trees. The land wears only a thin covering of earth. Scattered about are reminders of the folk who lived here thousands of years ago. There are standing stones, cromlechs, and the huge boulders, which were thought to have been used by the giants in their games. And everywhere still are the stone stacks of chimneys and engine houses, marking the presence of the miners. There lived Zaki Pender, the farmer's son, whose home was a mile or more from any neighbour. But this bothered him not at all. He was not a lonely boy. He simply enjoyed his own company and was never happier than when wandering the cliffs or the high moor and making up stories in his head about the people of long ago. And Zaki was just as happy singing in the church choir of a Sunday. It was said in those days that the people of Zennor were the finest singers in Cornwall, and young Zaki was no exception, nor was Zaki's friend Tom Taggis. Tom Taggis was a tin man. 6 days out of 7 he worked in the dark and wet and heat of the mine. He lived in a little granite cottage just halfway between Zaki's home and the church. Every Sunday morning Zaki would call on Tom, and together they walked to church to sing in the choir. They made a fine pair as they strolled along together, scrubbed and smart in their Sunday best. They didn't say much, but if Zaki had an older brother, it's clear he'd have wished him to be like Tom. Likewise, Tom with Zaki. It was one sunny Sunday morning that Zaki first noticed the beautiful young woman sitting very straight in the single carved oak chair at the very back of the church. Tom noticed her too. She was a pretty girl, and no mistake. Her hair, when it escaped from a bonnet shaped curiously like a shell, shone like a coil of gold. As for her gown, it was of a gleaming silken silver that swirled around her like a wave of the sea. Next Sunday, there she was again in her chosen place. Sunday after Sunday she reappeared, each time leaving as mysteriously as she had come, and each time they saw her, Zaki and Tom exchanged glances as if to say, "Here she is again." Then, but strangely, neither mentioned it to the other, nor, it seemed, did they feel it necessary to do so. On the 7th Sunday was the most remarkable happening of all. While the rest were busy singing the last hymn, Tom Taggis suddenly stepped out of his choir stall and walked straight down the aisle to where the lovely girl was standing. He took her by the hand, and together they disappeared through the great doorway. Nobody seemed to notice them go. Nobody, that is, except Zaki Pender. As soon as ever he could, Zaki was racing down the churchyard steps after them. He quizzed and squinted this way, that way. Nothing, nobody. Then he spied the couple, At once he made after them, keeping well out of sight. When Tom Taggis and the stranger reached the rushing stream with no name that plunged from the high moor down to the sea, what did they do but leap, hand in hand, into the peaty water? As they did so, Tom Taggis caught Zachary's eye and placed a finger on his lips, as if to say, "Don't say a word, my friend, not a word." Then the stranger's glimmering robe fell away, and Zachary saw that she spotted not 2 human feet, but a pair of gleaming fish's fins. She was a mermaid. Zachary was so surprised and delighted that he could barely think. As for telling the rest of the village, well, now, who would believe such a fairy tale from Zaki Pender, the maker of stories? Almost a year drifted by. Curiously, nothing much was said in the village of the strange affair of Tom Taggis and his disappearance. Such things had happened before in Zennor, without a word to others. Young women, and especially young men, had left home to try their fortunes beyond Cornwall, and often beyond the sea. At first, Zaki missed his friend, but as the weeks and months passed, it seemed almost as if he had forgotten the affair of Tom Taggis and the mermaid. It took an October gale, the fiercest along the coast for many years, to blow it back into his mind again. Zaki lay in his bed, marvelling at the sound of the winds and the waves. He thought of stories he had heard of fine sailing ships that had taken refuge in the cove below Zennor to escape the anger of the sea. But Zaki had not seen not a single one. All at once he made up his mind. "It's now or never," he said. Tugging on his trousers, he crept downstairs, hitched an oilskin over his shoulders, and gently let himself out by way of the back door. Night was turning into day. Zaki hurried through the village and made his way towards the cliff tops. Would he see a sailing ship? It was as if the sea itself answered his question. He heard from far below Zennor Head a great thrust of water burst from the famous blowhole down there which, in stormy weather, swallows great gulps of high sea, only to spray them out again 100 feet and more above the cliff tops. The waters rose up in a huge curve over Zaki's head and fell to earth just beyond him, exploding in millions of watery fragments. Zaki threw up his arms to protect himself from the salt sea drops, but for a moment blinded him. Then there was such a sound as he never had heard in his life before. It was the strangest small cry, a kind of keening or wailing, boo-hoo, boo-hoo, boo-hoo. It had something of a low moan of a razorbill, the tiny gazelle of a puffin, the sorrowful hooey of a seal. Very cautiously, Zaki opened one eye, then the other. What do you think he saw? Directly in front of him, safe on a soft bed of bracken and heather, lay a baby. It clenched and unclenched its fists and waved its arms wildly. But this was no earthly child. The lower half of its body was that of a fish, and instead of feet, a pair of shiny fins turned now this way, now that. No doubt about it, this was a merry child, and its mother must be a mermaid. It was the most beautiful creature Zaki had ever seen. It stared up at Zaki, plainly in terror for its life. Zacky had no notion of whether or not the merry child could understand him, but "Don't worry, my dear," he said in the kindest voice he could muster. "I'll soon see that you're safely back where you belong." Seizing up the merry child and holding it tight, Zacky turned and as fast as he could ran back the way that he had come. At last he reached the stream with no name. As he made to follow its course down to the cove, he saw a second astonishing sight. Swimming powerfully upstream was the lovely Merrymaid of all those Sundays before. In his joy at the sight of the Merrymaid, the little merry child almost slipped from Zacky's hold. With an amazing leap through the air, the Merrymaid grasped the merry child from Zacky's arms, turned about and re-entered the stream as it raced down to the cove. As she did so, she smiled at Zacky, a wonderful smile, and from a cluster of what looked like jewels about her throat, she threw him a small, gleaming object. As it flew through the air, it flashed in the morning light. Zacky caught it easily. It was a curious little shell, the likes of which he had never seen before. Its outside was silver. The inside was pure gold. Again, Zacky told no one of what had happened and what he had seen. Soon it was summer again. Zacky, his back to the sea, was spending thistles in his father's fields above the cove. He never could tell just what it was that made him suddenly spin round and look down at the ocean far below. Lying in the bay was a handsome sailing ship. 3 seamen and a 4th man, seemingly the captain, were in the act of lowering the anchor. This done, they leaned over the ship's side and gazed down into the water. Quite without warning, a figure rose from the depths of the sea and broke the calm surface of the bay. It was the Merrymaid. Her voice, pure as the note of a bell, floated up to where Zacky was standing. "Captain," she called, please, raise your anchor. It is lodged directly before the entrance to my secret sea cave beneath the waters. I cannot enter, and my dear children and husband are imprisoned within." Not wishing to harm or offend the creature, the captain and his men weighed anchor with all speed. As it hauled dripping from the sea and the Merrymaid plunged out of sight, at that very moment a strong breeze arose, filling the sails of the ship as it moved gracefully out of the cove. Almost at once the Merrymaid reappeared smiling. At her side, also smiling, was a handsome dark-haired young man. Zacky recognised him at once. Tom Taggis. A smaller figure came to the surface. Its golden hair glinted in the sun. It was the very same merry child, now grown a little older, that Zacky had rescued on the night of the great storm. Another merry child appeared, and then another, 7 in all. By this time, the Merrymaid and Tom Zaggis had spotted Zacky standing at the top of the cliff. Soon the merry children saw Zacky too. Smiling, the Merrymaid and Tom Zaggis and all the merry children swam in the merry circle, waving joyfully to Zacky. Then, as if at some signal, they all dived out of sight and were seen no more. Zacky shook his head in wonder. He took his tiny silver and gold shell from his pocket and gazed at it for a moment. "I know what I'll do," he said to himself as he walked slowly home. "When I am a grown man, I shall tell of all this to my dear wife and children, so that the tale may be remembered for all time." And so he did. Neither Tom Taggis nor the beautiful Merrymaid nor a single merry child was ever seen again in Zennor. All that remain are the words of Zacky's story, and the oak chair with its carving of the strange sea creature that still stands in the church as a reminder of when the Merrymaid came up from the Zennor strand to walk upon the Cornish land. Well, that was a lovely story today, wasn't it, boys and girls? I really do hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Do you believe in mermaids, or merrymaids as it's called in this book? I hope so. Anyway, as always, I want you to look after one another, be kind to one another, and try and have some fun every single day. Until next time, bye-bye.